Ladies and gentlemen, I just got out of the theater seeing Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer in IMAX. I had to see it in IMAX. I just knew that would be the best possible experience for me to have. Actually, there might be better experiences. I think there was a couple different showings that did even grander things than that, but IMAX itself was enough for me, and it was definitely one of the best theater experiences I've had in a long time. So this is a movie I've been anticipating solely because of the director. So the concept of the movie itself, it being basically a biography of course, Robert Oppenheimer, that topic itself wasn't something that immediately grabbed me. I wasn't like, oh, I need to see this movie about this person. Even though I do find some interest in World War II topics and histories, I never really felt like I needed to see a movie about it. But because Christopher Nolan was doing it, that, obviously led me to wanting to see this. That's the brilliant thing about this, is that it's a film I didn't originally think I would find interest in just by knowing the synopsis of it, but Christopher Nolan is able to take it and just turn it into this absolute masterpiece. So of course this is going to be a spoiler-free review, even though there's not really much spoilers to this movie, if we're going to be honest. It's a movie about history, like what can you really spoil? But regardless, I'm going to try to, not go into too much detail. We're going to do positives and negatives, but trust me, there ain't going to be many negatives. I'll just say that right off the bat. Of course, Christopher Nolan's directing is just outstanding in this movie. It completely feels like a Christopher Nolan movie, 100%, but it also feels so different. It's very heavy on dialogue. Like, there's a ton of dialogue in this movie. It's pretty much 95% of the movie, but the dialogue is so well written. It's so well acted. And it does add a lot to what's going on. Pretty much every single line of dialogue has some level of importance to the story of either the characters or the overarching themes. The cast is probably one of the best casts I've ever seen in a movie. I mean, there's probably at least 40 names you can recognize within the movie, but just some of the ones that I think stood out the most. You got, of course, Cillian Murphy as the lead role of Oppenheimer. He was outstanding. I think this is one of the best roles I've ever seen for an actor in a long time. Like, if he's gonna get nominated for some Oscars this year, for sure. Then of course, Emily Blunt, she was fantastic. She actually had a bigger part in this movie than I thought she was going to have. There were certain parts where she wasn't as included, but when she was there, she was outstanding. She didn't even look like herself, which is another really brilliant thing about this movie, is that they actually made a lot of the characters look like their real life counterparts as much as humanly possible, even to the point of using prosthetics. Like Emily Blunt, you can tell there was definitely some prosthetics on her face to make her look more like the real person. And I think that's a really nice touch. I think it adds a lot to what's going on. It's no CGI, it's all prosthetic, but you could tell there was something going on there because it didn't look 100% like Emily Blunt. Florence Pugh, although she wasn't in too much of the movie, she was outstanding when she was in it. You of course have Matt Damon and Robert Downey Jr., which he blew me away. And I've only ever seen Robert Downey Jr. and I think only in the Marvel movies. I've maybe seen him in one or two other films, but for the most part, it's been the Marvel films. And seeing him in something a lot more serious, a very different style overall, I thought was just very, very interesting. He had some really great scenes in this movie. The soundtrack by Ludwig Göransson was absolutely outstanding, and it's a Christopher Nolan movie, so the soundtrack is going to be blasting in your ears every single scene. And yes, it does that in this movie as well, but when it does that, it works all the way through. And amazing music. I loved it. And then getting into more of the themes of the movie itself, one thing I've really enjoyed is how they were constantly talking about the science and politics of the atomic bomb and the creation of it. And they focus on both sides of it. So you have a lot of the movie where it's just obviously the scientists discussing the actual science behind the bomb. And if you're interested in physics or chemistry, really anything involving any of that, you're gonna be interested in that, mostly physics. And a lot of it, I didn't understand whatsoever. I'll be honest, like I'm not that smart when it comes to physics. So when they're talking about their old physics stuff, I'm just sitting there trying to take it all in. And yes, a lot of it just goes over my head, I'll be honest. But when there's certain stuff that you do realize what they're talking about and you do kind of fully understand, especially if you've taken physics courses before and you understand a little bit about it, it is cool to hear them discussing those different topics. And then probably the most interesting part of it is the politics behind the atomic bomb and the creation of it, and basically just revolving around the debates of whether or not it should have been made at all. And then even furthering that, the debates about like how they should be using it, what should they be using it on, and who should we talk to about it? Like, should they give the information to the Russians? Because of course they were allies with the Russians during World War II. And then there's worries about, communist spies within the project. And there's just a lot of political situations going on within this story. And I think all of it works perfectly. And especially the back half of the film is very heavy with that, with the aftermath of what happened, which I also want to touch on that. I love how this movie's structured. So the first act of the movie is just all about Oppenheimer's early life before getting involved in the project. The second half, or the second act of the film, second third, is all about the actual development of the bomb itself, which I think was probably the best part of the movie. And then the third act is dealing with the aftermath of the bombs going off in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there was this big controversy about basically Oppenheimer's involvement in this project, and I don't want to go too into detail just in case you don't want to know anything about it, because I actually didn't know most of this stuff. All I knew going into this movie is who Oppenheimer was and the fact that he was the one who made the bomb. That's all I knew. I didn't know all these little details about him and his life, and I think that's one of the best things about a biography or just historically accurate movie, is they're able to learn all these things through the lens of these characters. And assuming it's accurate to history, which I'm assuming Christopher Nolan would make it accurate, then I think it just makes for a really fantastic way to educate yourself on these topics. I think it's much better than just reading a Wikipedia or some shit. I'd much rather watch the story unfold, and yes, I learned a ton from it. But back on Christopher Nolan's directing, one of the best things he does in this movie is just showcasing the guilt from Oppenheimer after the bombs drop. The way they utilize that is just, it's so damn horrifying. There's so many scenes where you just have a look on Oppenheimer's face and he just looks so distraught, and then you have this really just loud beating heart type noise going on in the background, and you don't really learn what that noise is till later in the film. And I think it's just so brilliant the way it's done, especially seeing in IMAX. I mean, there's some scenes in this movie where it's like your ears are like piercing with how loud it is, but it's so effective because it's trying to raise those emotions in you, and it makes you very anxious. And there's a lot of scenes that are anxiety inducing, which you wouldn't expect that from a movie so dialogue heavy, where there's no action, there's no moments like that. It's all dialogue, but it keeps you on the edge of your seat regardless. And the way it does that is just so brilliant, like all of his movies, really. Getting into the negative, which yes, it's just one negative. It's not even a big thing if we're going to be honest. There are some scenes in this movie where the music is too loud. And this is, funny enough, something that I've heard some other people say as well. But there are some scenes where the music, amazing as it is, it was just a little too loud. So you couldn't hear some of the dialogue in the scene, which it was like once or twice, maybe. It didn't happen frequently. It wasn't like a big deal, but there were like one or two scenes where I really couldn't hear what the characters were saying that well. I don't know if it was just my theater, I don't know, but there was one or two scenes. It was not the whole movie. It was not this long running problem, but it was like, okay, you probably could have lowered the music a little bit because it was like almost kind of hard to hear what the characters were saying. It obviously wouldn't be a problem if you had subtitles, but I obviously did not have subtitles watching it in the theaters. So that's the only negative I can say though. The rest of the movie is fantastic. This is definitely not going to be for everyone. If you're not interested in history, if you're not interested in World War II history, if you're not interested in a dialogue heavy film, if you just want pure action, like there's a lot of things you're not going to get out of this movie if you're that type of a viewer. But if you are interested in World War II history, if you are interested in very political thriller-esque movies that just have absolutely terrifying visuals in a lot of scenes. This movie is a horror movie, if I'm going to be honest. It is a horror movie in a lot of aspects, the horror elements it has to it, because it is a horrifying subject. I mean, the whole idea of the bomb, it's this necessary evil that's talked about throughout this movie, where these characters that you could tell they don't want to do it, but they just feel like this they need to, they feel like they have to. And that's basically the conversation a lot of these characters have to justify creating this, is that they say they have to. If they don't do it, the Nazis will, someone else will if we don't do it, and they justify it by saying it will end the war, it'll end the war for good. And the way the movie ends, the final note it ends on, is so goddamn perfect. It's a perfect movie. I'm sorry, it's pretty much perfect, other than that one thing I said in the negative. So I'm gonna give this a 9.8 out of 10. It's just losing 0.2 because, you know, I can't give it 10 out of 10. It's just too hard for me to give a movie 10 out of 10. There's only a few movies I've given that to, but 9.8 sounds pretty damn good for me. This movie is just freaking phenomenal. Go see it in theaters. I strongly recommend watching it in IMAX, but if you don't want to watch it in IMAX, you don't have to. It's recommended, at least in my opinion, but it's kind of hard to find a theater with IMAX these days. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below if you've seen the movie. If you haven't, let me know. Are you going to go see it? And yeah, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. Peace out, everyone.